Kurtz. Your mission is to terminate the Colonel's command.
Terminate.
Terminate with extreme prejudice.
Watch this. A close-up of Marlon Brando as the Godfather himself. Perfectly natural. Completely magnetic. Now imagine this. He's reading cue cards just off screen. You could certainly make the case that Marlon Brando had two distinct primary careers in movies, the young Brando of the 50s and the older Brando of the 70s. Both reached incredible heights, separated by valleys in the 60s, where he was neither fish nor fowl, and arguably didn't get the best roles. But like any great craftsman, he stayed busy until 1971 brought a production that required him to put cotton in his cheeks, and the rest is history that we'll attempt to make sense of here. Brando's approach wasn't a shortcut or a sign of laziness. Built on method acting's pursuit of genuine feeling, his use of cue cards was a deliberate tool. He believed the act of searching for words, the pauses, the hesitations, made his performances more real, more human. This approach didn't just set him apart, it sparked a quiet revolution in how actors approach their craft. Think of the old school greats, precise, polished, and a little too perfect. Then came Brando, whose performances were marked by grand gestures and rhythmic delivery that left little room for surprise. Their words landed with the certainty of a stage performance, each syllable carefully measured and projected. Brando's arrival marked a sharp break from this tradition. Instead of embracing the ornate, he sought out the ordinary, moments that felt unscripted and alive. In his breakout role as Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire, Brando's cry of "Stella" under the dim glow of a New Orleans street lamp wasn't just loud or emotional, it was raw, immediate, and unpredictable. The performance rattled audiences who were used to the clean, almost musical cadence of previous generations. This shift was rooted in his training. Brando studied under Stella Adler, who brought the teachings of Stanislavski to America. Adler emphasized living the part, urging her students to experience the emotional life of their characters rather than simply recite lines. Brando took this lesson to heart, pushing it further than most. He often said that memorizing dialogue made it sound like Mary Had a Little Lamb, a nursery rhyme stripped of real feeling. In interviews, he complained that too much rehearsal left performances stiff. Brando's rebellion wasn't about ignoring the script, but about refusing to let it dictate the entire performance. He wanted to capture the way people actually speak, full of hesitations, false starts, and moments of uncertainty. Brando's use of cue cards was a calculated move that reflected his core belief: acting should mirror the unpredictable rhythm of real conversation. In everyday life, people rarely know exactly what they'll say next. They pause, search for words, and sometimes stumble mid-thought. Brando wanted to capture this natural uncertainty on screen. For him, the pauses and hesitations weren't flaws. They were evidence of genuine thought and feeling. He saw memorized dialogue as the enemy of authenticity. In his view, rehearsed lines too often sounded mechanical, stripped of spontaneity. To avoid falling into this pattern, he deliberately avoided perfect memorization and instead relied on cue cards as a tool to keep his performances fresh. Brando's method was simple but effective. By placing cue cards around the set, on lamps, on tables, and even, as reported, on a co-star's chest, he ensured that every glance for a line would trigger a real moment of searching. This technique forced him to react in the present, as his character would, rather than recite lines from memory. The result was dialogue that felt lived in and immediate. When Brando paused or let his sentences trail off, it wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate effort to let the character's thoughts unfold in real time. This approach is especially evident in his performance as the Godfather. Brando's portrayal is marked by a slow, contemplative delivery that gives the character a sense of gravity and depth. The cue cards allowed Brando to build those thoughtful silences and subtle shifts in expression that made him so memorable. One of Marlon Brando's most enduring character performances, and perhaps his and any actor's defining moment in cinema, was his comeback film, the 1972 classic drama, The Godfather, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Fresh off an Oscar win for writing Patton in 1970, Coppola had just enough influence to convince Paramount to go with his choice for the lead role, Marlon Brando, instead of the studio favorite, Burt Lancaster. broadcaster. Brando was down and out in some ways, having endured a slow and dreary 1960s that saw him fade from public view. But time marches on, the 1970s hit, and the Hollywood golden era was long in the rearview mirror. No one much had planned to see Brando again in the coveted spotlight. How did Brando transform Vito into one of the deepest and most unforgettable characters in film history? First, Vito was a proud man, and a man of some stature. Brando got bigger for the role and added cotton inside his mouth to puff his face up. This aged Brando and made him look much less familiar to audiences than he would have if he'd tried to be a 50-year-old version of the guy they knew from Streetcar and Waterfront. His interior world is a mix of compassion for his family and friends and a ruthlessness that we only see bits of as he shows us Vito as an older and wiser man, still tough when needed, but a man who is in the later stages of his life and career, ready to hand the reins to his sons. Brando captivates us in the first scene of the movie, holding court in his dark office at his daughter's wedding. We realize he's a man who takes no for an answer only rarely and is used to giving orders. But he's also a fair man and one that is willing to explain his position. The viewer trusts him and ultimately trusts Brando. This performance is a result of his method acting, where he gained weight for the role, added cotton to his mouth, and created a low-tone, high believability voice for Vito that seeps out slowly and delivers a message. You'll wait for every syllable. His diction and delivery as Vito are all part of the package that includes holding a cat as an ad-lib and later delivering the terms on a heartfelt deal after one of his family dies. Brando's philosophy of acting centered on the belief that emotional realism, not technical precision, was the foundation of a memorable performance. He saw acting as a way to reveal the messiness and unpredictability of real life, even if that meant breaking from the industry's long-standing rules. Hollywood in the mid-20th century valued efficiency and exactness. Scripts were tightly constructed, rehearsals were regimented, and actors were expected to deliver lines as written, without deviation. Brando resisted this approach. He believed that the most meaningful connection between actor and audience came from moments that felt spontaneous, vulnerable, and unguarded. For him, the small imperfections, a pause, a stumble, a wavering voice, were not mistakes, but the very things that made a character feel alive. This commitment to emotional truth sometimes frustrated directors and producers, who saw his methods as undisciplined or even disrespectful to the process. But Brando remained convinced that only by embracing imperfection could an actor truly reach the audience. His performances offered proof of this idea. In On the Waterfront, Brando's portrayal of Terry Malloy reached its peak in the famous cab scene with Rod Steiger, as Terry utters, "I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of a bum, which is what I am." The moment lands not because of its polish, but because of its rawness. The pauses, the searching for words, the emotion in his voice, they all contributed to a sense that the audience was witnessing something deeply personal. Brando's characters were not distant or untouchable. They were tangible, flawed, and deeply human. The effect was a new kind of emotional connection, one that made viewers feel as if they were sharing in the character's struggles and triumphs. His choices, from the way he slumped his shoulders to the way he let silence linger, invited the audience to step inside the character's world. Brando's pursuit of perfection and emotional realism had visible consequences, both for himself and for those around him. His insistence on working his way, even in the face of industry norms, set him apart as a true maverick. The price of this perfection was paid, not just in the intensity of his performances, but in the friction he generated on set and the lasting reputation he acquired. Brando's unconventional style didn't just challenge the norms of one production. In Apocalypse Now, his approach again put him at odds with the film-making process. He arrived late, unprepared by standard measures, and disagreed with director Francis Ford Coppola about the direction of Colonel Kurtz. This unusual method, while frustrating for the director and crew, was another way for Brando to preserve the spontaneity he valued. Industry anecdotes further illustrate how Brando's methods shaped his reputation. Yet those who worked closely with him often saw a different side, a performer deeply invested in the craft, determined to protect the integrity of his work even when it meant challenging authority or convention. Brando's stubbornness influenced not just the films he worked on, but the very discipline of acting itself. His insistence on emotional realism inspired a generation of actors to embrace a more naturalistic style. Al Pacino, who shared the screen with Brando in The Godfather, quietly absorbed the lessons of Brando's process, while Robert De Niro drew from Brando's example to cultivate his own approach to character. Beyond individual actors, Brando's approach sparked broader conversations within the film industry about what authenticity could look like. Directors and writers began to rethink how to shape performances, sometimes building scripts and sets that allowed for greater improvisation and unpredictability. Brando's deliberate forgetting of lines was never a shortcut. It was a radical act that redefined realism on screen. By embracing uncertainty and letting each moment unfold naturally, he made space for performances that felt immediate and alive. His approach marked a decisive break from theatrical tradition, showing that authenticity could be found in every pause and imperfect gesture. His best moments may come after an assassination attempt on his own life in The Godfather, where he can barely speak. We see Brando's eyes react when his son comes to protect him, and his smile and slow movements all fit into the scope of the character he's created. It is Marlon Brando's performance that lifts The Godfather from excellent to immortal. As audiences, we can still recognize Brando's influence in the subtle hesitations and quiet moments of today's best actors. The next time you watch one of his scenes, notice how the pauses and searching glances draw you in. That's the legacy of a true original, a performer who refused to learn his lines, and in doing so, taught us all what acting could be. He didn't just act, he lived every line without ever memorizing one. If this changed how you see Brando, give the video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the minds of cinematic legends.